Right now, I'm standing in the middle of a warm, dry room, and outside it's 19 degrees. The walls are solid, the floor doesn't creak. There's a kettle going, and the windows are dripping with the good kind of condensation, the kind that means the heat is staying in. This is my home, and almost nobody who knew me 4 years ago would believe I'm the one who built it. I built this whole place out of a discarded thing that was sitting in a field with weeds growing through it, something people drove past for years and never looked at twice. This is a true story, my story, and I'm telling it because I know somebody out there is sleeping in a car tonight and thinking it's over. Before the end of this, I'll show you the one cheap object that finally kept me warm through my first real winter. It cost me less than a tank of gas, and you don't need land, you don't need savings, and you don't need anyone's permission to start. So let me take you back to the night I had nothing. I still remember the exact moment I knew I was homeless. It wasn't dramatic. It was 4 in the morning at a gas station, and I was feeding my last 2 quarters into a coffee machine, and the steam fogged up the little mirror by the door, and I wiped it with my sleeve and looked at myself and thought, I have nowhere to go when the sun comes up. That was it. No sirens, just a woman in a parking lot with 50 cents of coffee and a car that was almost out of gas. I had been renting a small place for years. I was never rich, but I was steady. Then the rent went up $200 in one jump, my hours got cut, and my car needed a transmission all in the same 8 weeks. That's all it takes. People think you have to do something terribly wrong to end up without a home. You don't. You just have to be one bad month away, like most of the country already is, and then have that month actually arrive. So I lived in my car, a 1998 sedan with a back seat that didn't fold down, which anyone who slept in a car will tell you is its own special kind of misery. I stuffed a rolled towel against the window gap. I parked behind a grocery store where the lot lights stayed on all night because the dark scared me more than the cold did, and I learned fast that the world has a look for people like me. A woman at a laundromat once moved her purse to the other shoulder when I walked in. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That little motion told me exactly what she'd decided about me in half a second. But here's what that woman didn't know. While she was clutching her purse, I was doing math. Every single day I was doing math because I had figured out that the only way out of a car was a shelter I owned outright, something nobody could raise the rent on or evict me from. I couldn't afford rent. So I stopped trying to afford rent, and I started trying to afford freedom instead. And that decision to stop trying to afford rent and start trying to afford freedom instead is exactly what I ended up writing down in full detail, so you don't have to figure it out alone the way I did. I put the whole step-by-step process into a digital book called First Shelter. It's also part of a series that includes Build Deeper and Built from Nothing, and it covers everything from finding your first shell to insulating it, heating it safely, and making it genuinely livable on almost no money. If you want the full roadmap in one place, it's $97, and the link is in the description. A lot of people tell me it's the first thing that made the whole idea feel real and doable instead of just a dream. But back to what I actually found first, because the shell is just the beginning. That decision changed everything. And it's the reason I'm standing in a heated room right now instead of a parking lot. So let me show you the first thing I found. Everybody assumes you need thousands of dollars to get off the street, and that assumption is exactly what keeps people stuck. I believed it too, right up until I started actually looking at what things cost when nobody wants them anymore. I spent 3 weeks on free classified sites and local buy-nothing groups on my cracked phone, sitting in libraries to use the free power and internet. I wasn't looking for a house, I was looking for a shell. Something with walls and a roof already attached that had lost all its value in other people's eyes. And I found it about 40 minutes out of town, sitting in a farmer's backfield, an old cargo trailer, the kind that used to haul equipment, 16 feet long, metal skin, one busted door, a soft spot in the floor, and 2 flat tires sunk into the mud. The farmer wanted it gone. He'd been meaning to haul it to scrap for 2 years and never got around to it. I offered him $300, which was almost every dollar I had, and he looked at me like I was doing him the favor. He helped me air up the tires with his compressor, and a guy from the same online group towed it to a cheap storage lot for $40 because I told him the truth about my situation and he'd been there once himself. Now, $300 for a rusty box on wheels sounds insane when you're scared. I get it. But think about what I actually bought. I bought walls that were already standing. I bought a roof that was already welded on. I bought a floor, a frame, and most importantly, a thing with no mortgage, no lease, no landlord, and no monthly bill attached to it. The average rent in this country is over $1,500 a month now. I paid $300 one time, and it was mine forever. People in my life found out, and some of them were kind, but a couple of them laughed. One relative told me I was going to live in a tin can and freeze to death, and that I should just get a real job and a real apartment like a normal person, as if I hadn't already had both when the rent doubled. That comment stung. It stung because a small part of me was afraid she was right about the freezing, because she wasn't wrong about one thing. That metal box in the summer was an oven, and in the winter it was going to be a freezer. Metal doesn't insulate anything. On my first night sleeping in it, the temperature inside dropped almost as low as the temperature outside, and I understood that a shell is not a home. A shell is just a beginning. The real fight was going to be against the cold, and I had no idea yet how I was going to win it. The next assumption I had to kill was the idea that fixing that floor and those walls would take money I didn't have. It didn't. It took garbage. That soft spot in the floor was my first real test. I was terrified of it, because I thought rotten floor meant the whole thing was junk. So I pried up the bad section with a $5 crowbar from a yard sale, and underneath it the metal frame was actually fine, just one water-damaged sheet of plywood. I went behind a construction site, and I want to be clear, I asked the foreman first, and I asked him if I could take the wood they were throwing in the dumpster. He looked at me for a second, then he said, "Take whatever you want," and he even pointed me to a stack of cutoffs they weren't going to use. Contractors throw away staggering amounts of good material because hauling it to the dump costs them money. Me taking it was doing them a favor too. I patched that floor with free plywood and a box of screws that cost me $6. Then I did the same thing with the walls that people think is the expensive part. Everyone assumes you have to buy lumber to build anything. You don't. I built my interior wall frames out of pallets. Now, let me tell you the real secret about pallets, because most people online get this wrong and it matters. Not every pallet is safe. You have to look for a stamp on the side. If you see the letters HT, that means heat treated, and it's safe to bring inside your home. If you see an MB, that means it was treated with a chemical called methyl bromide, and you leave that one alone, because you do not want to breathe that in a small space. Once you know that one rule, free lumber is everywhere. Behind hardware stores, behind furniture shops, on the side of the road with a sign that says free. I broke down heat-treated pallets with that same crowbar, pulled the nails, and I had a stack of solid wood strips for the cost of my own sore hands. I framed the inside of that trailer over about 2 weeks, working with a $12 handsaw because I couldn't afford a power one yet, and blisters I could feel through my gloves. And the whole time, that relative's voice was in my head, tin can, freeze to death. I used it. Every board I put up, I thought, watch me. But framing walls doesn't make them warm. Empty walls are just a fancier freezer. And winter in my part of the country doesn't ask permission. It just shows up in October and stays until April. I had solved the shell and I had solved the structure, but I had not solved the one thing that actually kills people who live like I was living. The cold was still coming, and now I only had a few weeks left before it arrived. Here's where people told me I'd have to spend real money, because insulation from a store is expensive, and they were half right. A few rolls of the pink fiberglass stuff to do a space that size can run you a few $100s, and I didn't have a few $100s anymore. I had spent almost everything on the trailer itself. So I had to get clever, and getting clever is where I actually started to feel alive again for the first time in a year. I learned that insulation is really just about trapping still air and stopping heat from radiating away, and once you understand that, the whole world turns into insulation. The first thing I got my hands on was rigid foam board. You can buy it new, but I found nearly a full stack of it in a construction dumpster, slightly dented sheets they'd rejected. That foam has an R value of about 5 for every inch of thickness, which is genuinely excellent, better than the pink rolls per inch. Free, because it had a few dinged corners nobody wanted. I cut it to fit snug between my pallet wood studs with a bread knife, and I sealed the seams with a $2 roll of foil tape. But foam alone wasn't going to be enough against a metal skin that turns into a sheet of ice, so I added the second layer, and this is the one I want you to remember: reflective foil bubble insulation. It looks like bubble wrap with a shiny silver coating on both sides. A roll of it is cheap, around $20 to $30, and it does something the foam can't. It reflects radiant heat back into the room instead of letting it escape through the metal. But here's the part almost nobody tells you: the detail that separates people who stay warm from people who suffer. That reflective foil only works if there is an air gap next to the shiny surface. If you press it flat against the metal, it does almost nothing. You have to leave a little space, even half an inch, so the shine can actually bounce the heat back. I learned that the hard way on a cold night when I'd installed it wrong, wondering why I was still shivering, and then I read it on an off-grid forum at 2 in the morning and wanted to cry. I ripped it back off and reinstalled the whole thing with furring strips to hold that gap. The next night was warmer, and I hadn't spent a dime more. I'd just done it right. For the ceiling and the gaps I couldn't reach, I used something even cheaper. I collected wool blankets from thrift stores for $1 or $2 each, and old clothing nobody bought, and I packed it tight into the cavities. Wool is remarkable. It still holds warmth even when it gets a little damp, which cotton absolutely does not, and it was practically free. I stapled a layer of it right up against my ceiling before I closed it in with more free plywood. By the time I finished, the inside of that trailer looked like a real room. Wood walls, a solid floor, and a thermal envelope that cost me under $100 total because almost all of it came from dumpsters and thrift bins. The relative who said tin can came by once during this stretch, and she went quiet when she stepped inside. She didn't apologize, but she went quiet, and quiet from her was practically a standing ovation. Still, insulation only holds heat, it doesn't make heat. And a home with no way to get warm or cook a meal is just a well-dressed cold box. I had beaten the walls. Now I had to beat the fire problem, and fire in a small metal space is exactly where a lot of people get hurt. I was not going to be one of them. Now, I know some of you have been listening to me talk about dumpsters and pallets, and you're thinking, that's fine for her, she must be handy, she must have had help, this could never be me. I want to stop and talk to you directly, because you are exactly the person I made this for. I was not handy. I had never framed a wall in my life. I cried in a storage lot more than once. And I want to give you something you can actually do this week, starting from nothing, with no land and almost no money, so it stops being a story about me and starts being a plan for you. Start with the reflective foil insulation and one single window or one single wall of wherever you sleep right now, even if that's a car. A roll costs less than a meal out. Cut it to fit your window, leave that little air gap I told you about, and watch how much warmer that space gets the very first night. That one move, 20-some dollars, taught me more about staying alive than anything else, and you can do it tonight without owning a home at all. If you have even less than that, start collecting wool. Every thrift store has a bin of wool blankets and sweaters for $1. Wool against your body inside a sleeping bag will keep you warmer than 3 cheap synthetic blankets, and it keeps working when it's damp. That is a survival skill, and it costs the price of a coffee. And the pallets. Go find one heat-treated pallet, the one stamped HT, and just practice taking it apart. That's it. Learn that free lumber is real, and it's everywhere. Because the biggest thing standing between you and a home isn't money or land or skill. It's the belief that beginning requires permission. It doesn't. It requires one roll of foil and the decision to stop waiting. I promise you, the moment you make one thing warmer with your own hands, something changes in you that no landlord and no relative and no clutched purse can ever take back. Now, let me tell you how I got heat, because this is where it got dangerous, and I need you to hear the safety part as much as the clever part. Everyone assumes off-grid heat means a big expensive wood stove, and I assumed that too, until I priced them and nearly gave up. A proper small cabin wood stove can run several hundred to over $1,000, and installed right with the pipe and the heat shields. More. I didn't have it. So I went hunting again, and I found a tiny used stove, the kind meant for a small tent or a little boat cabin, for $60 from a man who'd upgraded his own setup. It was rusted on the outside, but the body was sound. But here's where I have to be honest about the fear, because a stove in a metal box is how people die if they're careless. The two things that kill you are carbon monoxide and fire. and I respected both of them like my life depended on it, because it did. I spent $35 on a battery carbon monoxide detector before I ever lit a single flame, and I mounted it at head height right where I slept. That $35 is the least negotiable money I have ever spent. If you take one thing from this whole story about heat, it's that the detector comes before the fire. Always. I built a heat shield behind the stove out of a scrap sheet of steel I found, mounted with a gap behind it so air could move. And I ran the chimney pipe out through a proper insulated fitting, not just a hole in the wall. I cut in a small vent on purpose, low on one wall, so fresh air could always feed the fire instead of it feeding on the air I was breathing. That felt backwards, cutting a hole to let cold in, but a fire that can't breathe fills your room with poison, and a little cold air low down is a fair trade for staying alive. The first night I ran that stove, I sat up watching the detector and the pipe for hours, terrified to sleep, but the trailer got warm. Genuinely warm, from a $60 stove and scrap wood I gathered for free, fallen branches and untreated pallet wood and offcuts from that same construction site. For the first time since the gas station parking lot, I sat in a warm room that belonged to me and I cried again, except this time it was the other kind of crying. That winter got down below zero more than once, and I stayed warm, in a metal box that a relative swore would freeze me to death, for the price of a used stove, a detector, and garbage other people threw away. I had proved every single doubter wrong, and I could have stopped there and been fine. But I hadn't found the best part yet, because, as smart as the stove was, I still had nights I couldn't run it, nights I was too tired, or the wood was wet, or I had to leave it out for safety, and on those nights the cold still crept in. I needed something that kept me warm with no fire at all, and what I found, the thing that finally carried me through, cost me less than a tank of gas, and it's sitting in my hands in almost every photo from that winter. For weeks, I'd been trying to heat the whole trailer all night long, and I was burning through wood and losing sleep, and I finally realized I'd been thinking about it completely wrong. You don't need to heat the room, you need to heat the person. That one shift is the secret, and once I understood it, everything got cheap and easy. Here's what I did, and it's so simple you'll think I'm joking. I built a bed within the bed. A small, sleeping box, almost like a bunk with a lid, walls of that free foam board and reflective foil lining the inside, just big enough for me and barely more. A tiny space that my own body heat could warm up in minutes and hold all night, no fire required. The military and cold weather survival guides have said this forever, that a smaller airspace around your body is the difference between shivering and sleeping. I just made mine out of trash. And the one object that made it work, the thing I promised you at the start, was a wool army surplus blanket. Not a fancy sleeping bag, a genuine heavy wool surplus blanket, the kind you can still find for around $20 to $30, sometimes less at a thrift store. Wool keeps insulating even when it's damp, it's naturally flame resistant, and a single good one weighs several pounds and traps an astonishing amount of heat. I lined my little sleeping box with one, climbed in with another over me, and on the coldest night of that entire winter, with no stove running, I was warm, sweating, almost. Inside a metal trailer, below freezing outside, warm from nothing but my own body heat, a foam box, and a $20 blanket that soldiers have trusted for 100 years. That's it. That's the whole secret. Not some expensive gadget. A wool blanket and a small space. The cheapest, oldest, most overlooked thing, sitting in every surplus store and thrift bin in the country, and it's the thing that finally made me feel safe. I had spent my whole life thinking safety was something you rented or bought or begged a landlord for. It turned out safety was $20 of wool and the decision to heat myself instead of the sky. I lived in that trailer for 2 full years while I saved. I added solar later, a single used panel, and a battery for lights, and to charge my phone. I built a little folding table and a real bed. And every month I put away the rent money I no longer paid, until I had enough to move up to the bigger, better place I'm standing in right now, which I also built using every single thing that field trailer taught me. The tin can didn't kill me. The tin can save my life, and it taught me the skills that built everything after it. So here's what I know now that I didn't know in that gas station parking lot. Nobody is coming to rebuild your life for you, but you are far more capable of doing it yourself than everyone has led you to believe. I was a woman with 50 cents of coffee and a clutched-at purse pointed her way, and I turned $300 of scrap into a home that no one can ever raise the rent on or take away from me. If you've made it this far, you're not the kind of person who accepts being written off. You're the kind who does the math, finds the discarded thing everyone else drove past, and builds something real out of it. That's who you are, whether the world has noticed yet or not. So tell me one thing, and I mean actually type it out, because I read these, and this community is real. What's the one discarded object near you right now, today, that you could turn into the start of something? An old camper, a shed, a trailer in a field, a van nobody drives? Tell me what it is and tell me where you're watching from, because I want to see how many of us there are. Leave it in a comment. Don't just think it, write it. And if any part of this made you believe that a warm, dry room of your own is still possible, come stand with the rest of us who are rebuilding from nothing. Subscribe and stay, because the next thing I'm going to show you is how I got running water and a real shower off-grid for under $50, and that one surprised even me. You are not one bad month from the end. You might be one wool blanket from the beginning. If you're still here with me, you're my kind of person. I'm inviting you into the Shelter Builders. This video was the overview inside. I walk you through the full first shelter build, right where I left off. Ask me your own questions and I answer you myself. No, machine. You're never doing this alone here. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen, and you can cancel anytime. Now, if a simple home can change your life, imagine what one could do for a struggling mother and her child. That next story is starting right here, and it will truly warm your heart. Stay with me.